So we will hear the statements that we received. We reached out to all relevant parties in this. So you will hear that after the interview. But I think at this point, we're going to air the interview that we conducted. Again, this was done on Tuesday afternoon with Ann Callas. As our coverage of the Janel Grant lawsuit continues, we are happy to welcome Ann Callas to the program. She is representing Janel Grant in the ongoing suit against Vince McMahon, John Laurinaitis, and WWE. And thanks so much for joining us today to speak with us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, you both, for your coverage of this. We appreciate it.
Well, we wanted to have you on to get a bit of an update on the case and also your reaction. We're speaking with you on Tuesday afternoon, so this is about 24 hours after the New York Post had released this story containing a letter dated December of 2021 by Janel Grant to Vince McMahon. And you are quoted in the article as well, but just tell me a bit about your reaction to this move that appears to be coming from Vince McMahon's side of things.
Well, we weren't surprised. It was a tactic to intimidate Janel and victim shame her. And serendipitously enough, during that period, we have been meeting with the foremost experts in sexual assault, in coercive control, in rape myths, and we are hiring the absolute best to explain the actions of a victim when they are under this coercive control. And they have testified in other trials of a similar nature very, very successfully.
Did you get the sense, first of all, what did you make of the timing of this move? We're 2 months removed from the suit coming out. I mean, it's a hard question to answer, but do you have any theories on why now? WWE is obviously going into a pretty massive week this week with their big event in Philadelphia. What do you think the thinking was on that side of things?
I can't even speculate why they did that, besides just to intimidate my client at the time.
And do you get the impression, based on what's in this New York Post article, it says that the letter was obtained from the WWE board's investigation. So do you have any belief about how Vince's side got a hold of the letter? It was apparently taken from Janel's work laptop at WWE as part of the WWE board investigation. Do you think there's any cooperation here between WWE and Vince to make this public?
I don't have any evidence of that. I just know that that Simpson Thatcher did not interview Janel as a part of this investigation. She made herself ready and available, and they did not interview her.
Yeah, and that brings to mind Jeffrey Speed, who was the lead director on the investigation. He gave a comment to the New York Times, I believe the day that the lawsuit was filed, saying that there was outreach to Ms. Grant and engagement with her lawyer. Like, do you have any response to that? Is that true in any way?
I wasn't representing her at the time, but no, that is not my understanding. My understanding is she made herself available and they did not reach out to her.
But Janel would have been open to participating in such an investigation.
Absolutely. When
you kind of look at the way that this suit has been received by the public, what have been some of your thoughts in terms of what you've learned about the WWE culture and sort of the response now that you have 2 months to have seen how this story has been handled, and people outside and inside the company that have commented on Vince McMahon and other stories that have come to light?
Well, we have had a real, and I've said this before, an onslaught of people coming forward. Even as of yesterday, we still get people that want to speak, that were witnesses. We are arranging a file on that. We are working really diligently to contact everyone back, make sure, times, dates, if they can remember. There are some similar stories. However, there is now non-public investigations going on. So some details I have to leave out.
Is there any chance that this could turn into a lawsuit that has multiple plaintiffs? Since we know that there are, by my count, about 7 women with allegations of misconduct against Vince or John Laurinaitis. Is there any possibility that this could include more plaintiffs in the future?
That's possible, but right now, my focus is on Janel and making sure that she's okay.
And how is Janel Grant doing in light of all of this? And this is being covered very heavily throughout the media.
She's okay. For someone who, because of what happened to her, suffering from PTSD and other ailments, she's resilient. We've been on the phone and talking to her a lot recently, so she's okay.
And reading the letter, there are some names, just first names that are mentioned, including Nick and Brad. And we reported through Front Office Sports last month that the officers who are mentioned in Janel Grant's lawsuit are Nick Khan, who is the current president of WWE, Brad Blum, who is the current COO of WWE. Is it right to assume that Nick and Brad, who are referred to in the letter, are Nick Khan and Brad Blum?
Yeah, I think that's fair to assume that.
Okay. And there's other names too. There's a Mickey and a Paul. Do you have any information about who those people are?
I think Paul was, she referred to Paul Mangieri, who is an executive assistant. Mm-hmm. But we still have, as witnesses coming forward, that a lot of executives knew what was happening and did nothing to intervene.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are wondering, since Nick Khan allegedly knew about this, Brad Blum, do you have any information about whether Paul Levesque, who's the chief content officer of WWE, he had any knowledge of this before the board generally found out about the relationship between Vince McMahon and Janel?
I can't comment on that now, just to say that we do have witnesses still coming forward from the knowledge of executives at the WWE.
Of those that you have heard that have been making the effort to reach out without naming names, do you get the sense that Vince McMahon is perceived now to be out of power, and this fear that I think a lot of people that have worked in that company, like, this is a guy that ruled this company and was largely untouchable? Do you think that some of that has been alleviated now, that there is a feeling that people can move forward and speak more openly today, or is there still that concern from some that you're hearing from?
Oh, I think there's still a grave concern out there. And I also said this before, when Vince McMahon left the company, that was a positive first step, but the circus-like atmosphere that contributed to this culture of corruption and victimization has to be addressed.
And do you know if any of the other executives in the company were aware of not only the relationship, but did they have any awareness of the abuse and the assaults that are alleged in the lawsuit?
I can't comment on that right now. We're still in the nascent stages too of our litigation.
Have all the parties been served at this point? And can you give it? They have been served.
Yes.
And what are we looking at in terms of like the next steps? Like, what are the next actions that, like, Brandon and I should be focusing on, for instance? Like, what are the big moments or events still to come and action to be taken?
Well, from serving the complaint, they have 60 days to answer. So that will happen within 60 days. And we'll proceed to litigation. We'll have our initial conference and start discovery.
So were WWE and Vince served around the same time as John Laurinaitis?
Everyone was served.
Okay. Yeah. So that would put their due time to answer around sometime in the middle of May.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Has there been any discussions through WWE? And are you, like, what comes out of the New York Post story is Vince McMahon has his representation. We know John Laurinaitis has his separate representation. And it would certainly seem that WWE will have their representation. Would that be a likely picture that we are painting here, that these three entities will have all different defenses? They will not be working together, you would assume.
I don't know.
And if I guess one more question, I'm not sure you'll be able to answer, but there's a lot of expectation around the notion that Vince is being investigated by some kind of federal agency, whether it's Department of Justice, SEC. Could you say anything about whether you and your client are cooperating with any kind of a federal investigation involving Vince?
I can't comment on a federal investigation.
you've obviously been, you've worked in this field for so long. Is there a uniqueness about this particular culture that stands out in its own way? And when you were first approached by Janel Grant, I mean, your own sort of reaction hearing these accusations for the first time. I mean, I'm sure you are somewhat have heard a lot of graphic details in your time, but did this somewhat stand apart?
I tried a lot of felony murder, rape cases as a trial judge, but this is of its own class. The depravity, again, the culture of corruption that allowed this to happen. I think the trier of fact will have a lot to listen to.
And was it a process for Janel to get, like, we are just reading this horrific lawsuit, and I have to imagine that it was a bit of a journey for her to be able to attach her name to this and get into such grand detail. Was that a evolutionary process for her to mentally get to be ready to be such a public face attached to this that so few would want to be?
It took a while, but again, she does have great courage. She has been grievously damaged, but she does want to help any potential other victims, people who have suffered what she suffered. And she feels that I think it was a bit cathartic for her, but also triggering and devastating in a lot of ways. I know I stayed with her with that complaint one day for about 9 hours with her. So it has been a long and arduous process, but we think we have a case that can be proven not beyond a reasonable doubt, but by a preponderance of the evidence.
And I guess just thinking for our audience who are mainly wrestling fans, if not completely wrestling fans, do you have any thoughts about how should WWE fans think about WWE these days, especially going into a big weekend where a lot of people are going to be watching WWE, and there's a lot of questions around the culture of WWE and what was allowed to have happened? I mean, do you have any suggestions for how WWE fans should think about this product, this entertainment product that's going to get a lot of attention this coming weekend?
Well, I would hate to put myself in the position of a fan because I never did watch WWE. Now I know a lot about WWE, but I think everyone can come to their own conclusions on what they witnessed themselves.
My last question is just taking it from the perspective of someone that reads this letter from 2021 and believes that this just reads as a woman that was in love with this man, that doesn't fully understand the coercive element that could be involved here. For people that are maybe not as educated on that fact, I mean, what do you read from this letter that starts off by listing, like, this is the 24th draft of this letter? And obviously this was a strategy from their part that was to convey that viewpoint, but you're seeing a lot of mixed reaction to this, that it's proven the opposite for some.
Right. I think it's not a mitigating factor at all for Vince McMahon. It's further proof of misconduct. Everyone knows about fight or flight. Why didn't she fight? Why didn't she, or he who's being assaulted? But there's also freeze and appease, where people just get frozen and then caught and then feel more and more trapped. And the fact that what I read, when she kept redoing the letter and kept editing the letter, it wasn't love, it was fear of repercussions. She wanted to get this letter right for him because she was very fearful of any negative repercussions. And she was, frankly, an emotional prisoner and was asked to do this by Vince McMahon. And she, by then, did what she was told. But again, I think we'll have our experts be able to expound more on why she felt this way, why victims of sex trafficking do this. It's been done before. R. Kelly, there were letters. The Raniere case, there were letters. Epstein, there were letters. This isn't a new thing like gotcha. It happens when people are sex trafficked. Again, intimidation of my client and to try to shame her.
All right. Well, Ann, you've been very generous with your time. I want to thank you very much for joining us, giving us the latest on the case and your perspective. And thanks so much for joining us today.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
So that was our interview with Ann Callas, who is the legal representation for Janel Grant. And there was a lot in that interview. We were limited with time with her, but I thought like there were several important parts to that conversation, Brandon. Going in order was kind of the clarification of Janel Grant and her willingness to take part in the WWE's investigation that was primarily concluded by November of 2022. It is substantially completed. Yes, let's get all the proper wording in. It is worth noting, though, Janel Grant was represented by a different lawyer at that time. Jeffrey Speed had stated there was outreach to Janel Grant's side, and ultimately she did not participate in the investigation, but through Ann Callas stating she was certainly willing to take part in such an investigation.
Yeah, so the quote from Jeffrey Speed, who was an independent member of WWE's board of directors. He was the lead independent member involved in the internal investigation, the special committee investigation. And as we know, Janel Grant says that she wasn't reached out to, she wasn't interviewed, no documents were requested from her. And Jeffrey Speed told the New York Times later that evening after the lawsuit was filed that I remain confident in our investigation, which included outreach to Ms. Grant and engagement with her lawyer. So her lawyer would be a different lawyer other than Ann Callas at that time. But that's, I mean, these parties are on very different pages in terms of whether or not there was actual engagement with Janel Grant for the investigation for the board.
Yeah, she did mention that all the parties have been served between WWE, Vince McMahon, and John Laurinaitis, and that there's about a 60-day period for the parties to respond. Which
May 14th is Laurenitis' due date, and if they were all served on the same day, it's not in the docket, but if all were served on the same day, they would all have the same due date of May 14th.
Yeah, and she explained that from there they would proceed to litigation, they would initiate a conference, and then move to the discovery process if the timeline stays intact. And mentioning several of the names as well that were listed in that letter by first name only. You had Nick and Brad, that I think everyone assumed was Brad Blum and Nick Khan, and Ann Callas seems to believe that would be accurate. There was also the names of Paul and Mickey that we understand to be Paul and Mickey Mangieri. Paul was an executive assistant, and it seems like Mickey we're not sure if this was a father-son, what the relationship was between the Mangieris, but holding similar positions with Vince McMahon.
And both we believe were executive assistants to Vince McMahon.
Yes.
Yes.
And there's also a chef who we don't know his identity.
We don't know about the chef.
The chef.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, just some other things I took just was the fact of her, like Ann Callas, you can research.
If I could jump in. So Paul Mangieri, an executive assistant to Vince McMahon. So a lot of people speculating that it was just the first name Paul that was in the letter. Is that Paul Levesque? As people just heard in the interview, we specifically asked about Paul Levesque. Ann Callas could not comment as to whether Paul Levesque was aware of the relationship before the rest of the board was aware, as allegedly Nick Khan and Brad Blum were. So we don't have an answer to that.
That's right. Yeah, and just stating the fact that, this is a unique case, just in that this is like the depravity listed here is in its own class, which covers a lot of ground if you have done your research onto Ann Callas and some of the cases she's been involved with as well. So those were some of the key takeaway points from that interview. Brandon, we also reached out to the legal representation for Vince McMahon, as we did with John Laurinaitis, and we did get responses back from each of those sides.
Yes, we asked WWE also. We have not gotten a response yet from them, but we do have some written comments from Jessica T. Rosenberg, who is the attorney for Vince McMahon. She's a lawyer from the Kasowitz firm, who actually just were litigating with WWE with the MLW lawsuit, but we do have some comments from her, as well as John Laurinaitis' lawyer, Edward Brennan. So I don't know which one you want to go to first.
Let's go to Vince McMahon's side first.
There we go.
So this is the statement from Jessica Rosenberg. Ms. Grant wrote this love letter to Mr. McMahon. Her attorney is now desperately trying to explain it away because it shows the relationship was consensual and the lawsuit's allegations are a sham. The false explanation that it was coerced is nonsense.
And then there's more.
Ms. Grant's letter is multiple pages, includes details of their relationship, and indicates she wrote 24 drafts. It makes no sense to coerce someone to write 24 drafts of a multiple-page love letter. And it finishes off by stating that Ms. Grant's letter is just one piece of evidence demonstrating the relationship was consensual and her allegations in the lawsuit are false. There are more pieces of evidence like this to come that will prove her claims are meritless.
Eager to see if maybe there'll be something in an exhibit, perhaps from Vince McMahon's side that shows he purportedly supports the notion that this was a consensual relationship. That's something you can imagine is when there is a response by May 14th. Oftentimes it is on the due date that we get the response. That maybe there'll be some sort of material that's made public as a result.
Yeah, I think this would be the first example of Vince McMahon's side. How aggressive it expects to be. Like, this does paint a picture that there is going to be a very contentious battle coming through, and the idea of there's a lot more where this came from, and the fact that they are like, I look at this New York Post story, like this letter is, it's interesting just to see the tactic at hand of releasing this letter, and you can have both sides that are going to be arguing over the language that we see right there. You have one side that is looking at 24 drafts of a letter. That sounds pretty bizarre for that amount of drafts to be made of a letter. And you have Vince McMahon's side that is arguing, how could you coerce someone to make 24 drafts of a letter? So, I mean, I don't think you're getting any black and white answer just based off of this letter. You can interpret it however you want, but it's just interesting that, one side believes this is a point in their corner, and the other side thinks it is only fuel for their side.
And I think what Vince's side is raising, or will raise, is that this letter was written December 24th, 2021. So remember, the NDA was agreed to the following month in January. So this is pretty late in the relationship, which is narrated throughout that complaint of, starting in 2019 all the way to early 2022. So this is pretty late in the relationship, after there are all these assaults that are described in the complaint. So I imagine that what McMahon's side will argue is that how can these claims be true when she wrote this love letter in December of 2021?
I guess we should also, before we get to Edward Brennan's statement, also include the portion from the New York Post story. They do have a screenshot of a text exchange between Janel Grant and Vince McMahon, with Janel Grant showing off her left hand and had a surgical procedure on her left finger, stating that, I think I'm tapping out today. And then follows up by, how will I write your letter? I can type and read it, or try to write it in a couple of days. I'm so sorry if I messed this up. I want you to have a nice letter. So there's nothing in this text exchange of Vince McMahon demanding that she write this letter, but it is a subject, obviously, of some concern for Janel Grant to complete this letter. And that could have been on her own volition, or it could be something that she was expected to do. You can read that however you want, but this was showcasing the fact that, she's writing this letter and has just gone through a surgical procedure on her finger as well.
Right. And this is around the time of Christmas, so it's not clear if this is a Christmas gift request or what it is.
So Edward Brennan as well gave us a short statement as well. When we reached out to him, Edward Brennan again is representing John Laurinaitis, and Edward Brennan writes, my client and I are satisfied that when all the facts become known, Mr. Laurinaitis will be vindicated from the allegations leveled against him. Judge Callis was a learned judge and is a skilled litigator. I anticipate she will ultimately see that Mr. Laurinaitis is, like her client, a victim in this case, and Judge Callis will do the right thing and dismiss my client from this lawsuit. In the event she does not, my client will clear his name and reputation in court, not in the media.
Yes. So Ann Callas was a judge in Illinois, is what's being referred to there.
That's right. Yes. So, but as of now, John Laurinaitis still a listed defendant on this in this civil suit. And that kind of just brings us to the present and where things stand now. I mean, we are still over a month away before any of these parties will have to respond. And I guess it's something to watch of if other parties decide to play any of this in the media in terms of any other disclosures or anything like that, as we saw with the New York Post this past week, and if that's going to be a tactic moving forward. And I don't think it was lost on people as well, this timing, that this does bring this case back into the forefront of people this past Monday, as WWE is going into a gigantic week where either this is going to get swept up in all the other wrestling news among people that are following the product, or it's going to be something that is topical, that is going to be brought up more. Like we have some examples just this week of, CM Punk and Cody Rhodes on the MMA Hour being asked about the case. Becky Lynch is doing the media rounds, and in almost all the interviews you see, she is being asked about Vince McMahon and the Janel Grant lawsuit as well. So this is the time of the year when WWE talent are more front and center than any time of the year, and some outlets will be asking about it, and this does bring up new information.